morning, everybody. Wow, this very early in the morning. Actually, I gave same lecture last year, and last year actually I took a taxi, and this morning I drove. So my advice to you is that to move around in Seoul, perhaps using the taxis or subways is much better than trying to drive here. Well, it's raining and a little chilly this morning, so I think my subject is a perfect subject for this weather. And my last posting was at the Blue House as the Deputy Director of the Office of National Security. There, I was able to work with all different national security agencies, including Foreign Ministry, Defense Ministry, National Intelligence Service, and Unification Ministry. Now, today I'd like to share with you. So I will talk about first my small experiences as diplomat for 40 years. And then I move into the main subjects, that is security challenges and Republic of Korea government's response to these challenges. First, well, I worked in a number of positions, including the Chief of Protocol. Well, Chief of Protocol is not about the substance. It's all about how we are going to have a successful meeting in terms of the time, place, and the atmosphere, and finally how it is portrayed in the press afterwards. So that was the job of the Chief of Protocol. And I worked in the Foreign Ministry for 38 years, but I was usually working on the North Korean stuff and North American stuff, that's United States in Korea, basically. And the Chief of Protocol actually added some colors to my portfolio. And I had very interesting new experiences while working as Chief of Protocol back in 2010 and 2011. And I found that the world of diplomacy was not wine and dine, and the world ruled by civility, and sometimes the world ruled by common sense. And I found that quickly that diplomatic world is not just that. And that's there. Civility, common sense, courteousness, gentlemanship, all there. But at the same time, the world of diplomacy is always a cutthroat world. It's a very tough world. For example, I had a number of cases of one should never give up as Chief of Protocol. It's like, say, my president wanted to have his picture taken in a multilateral meeting, and then the host nation says that photographer is not going to be allowed, so we cannot bring our official photographer to the meeting. That happened. I will not name names, but that happened in, I'll name the conference though. It happened in the Asia-Europe meeting back in 2010 or 11. And what happened was exactly like that. And then it was like over, I think, 1 year that I worked as Chief of Protocol. So I knew more than following the advice from the host nation, so to speak. So I decided to bring our official photographer in any case. And then I asked my colleagues to look at watch the gate to the main conference room. And if any official photographer is allowed in, just let me know. I was thinking that perhaps big countries, United States, China, Russia, big countries usually do not follow the rules of protocol that's given by the host nation. So I was looking for that, and voila, a certain nation brought in official photographer to the conference room, no problem. So I immediately just brought my official photographer, and there was a little attempt to block his way, but I insisted that rules have to be applied fair. And I see official photographer in the conference room there, and why shouldn't I? So I finally brought in the official photographer into the conference room, and my president was very happy about it. This is a very small instance. The purpose I introduce you to this small instance is not about, how important official photography is and how I was able to do that. It's about you go beyond the world that meets your eye in the news, in the press, in the TV, on TV, in the TV or in the newspapers. Actually, this world is as rough and tough as another world. You might go in afterwards. Some of you might be interested in becoming diplomats, and don't get deceived by this civility and courteousness, because in the conference room, in the negotiating table, even in the world of protocol, that should be courteous by definition, it's not. So I hope that you will go beyond that. Similarly, one of the biggest headache when you host the multilateral summit is having to take this one, the group photograph, because the leaders wanted to stand on a better spot so that their domestic press and domestic audience and domestic viewers in this case are rather pleased. And there are ways to give precedence to a group of leaders. Most common is how long a particular leader has served in that position, right? That's usually the rule that's followed. And secondly, sometimes we use alphabetical order of the name of the country. We sometimes do that. And then if these two wouldn't serve my purposes, then perhaps I can use this tool. That is, a current chairman, and increasingly a former chairman, and the future chairman are respected. We call it Troika. And I can use this to serve my purpose of having the particular leader to stand on the right spot. So this is about how you should be sometimes creative in trying to accomplish your purposes. And this is protocol, not as important as substance, but even in the world of substance, you'll have to be very creative. But secondly, equally important, you have to be creative, you have to have a logic on your side. So you have to come up with a logic, sometimes not terribly, how can I put it, not terribly good logic that I can advertise afterwards, but as long as this logic works in that at that particular moment, then you can use it. So you acquire experiences, you get more knowledge about how this diplomatic world is working, and then perhaps you would be able to have some more ammunitions there, protocol ammunition, so to speak, and then you can use it. The third one, trust but be there early, is also very important. I'll explain to you a couple of cases. Well, we had one multilateral meeting, and actually South and North Korean leaders, both of them, attend. And then as chief of protocol, my biggest concern is that my leader is not accorded a proper treatment relative to the North Korean leader. And this is a bigger problem than you think, because Actually, the North Korean leader who attends these multilateral summit meetings is not Kim Jong-un. So Kim Jong-un is not going to attend. Who attends? The gentleman's name is Kim Young-nam. He's now, I think, 92 years old, and he is the chairman of the Standing Committee of North Korean People's Assembly. And that's the official head of state in North Korea, and that's different from all other countries. So in other words, when ambassadors arrive at his postings, and they usually present their credentials to the head of state. So if it is a kingdom, then I'm supposed to present my credentials to His Majesty. If it's a presidential system and cabinet system, I'm going to present my credentials to the president. And in countries like Australia, where I was ambassador, and then the governor general is the head of state. So I present my credentials to Governor General instead of Prime Minister, most powerful person in the country. So that's the case. But in case of North Korea, all ambassadors wanted to meet Kim Jong-un, but they present credentials to Kim Young-nam, who is a figurehead of the country. I need instructions usually means no, yes. And when the other person says that, oh, I need instructions before I can answer your questions, that usually means no. But some countries actually do need instructions. This is a good case. I can name names then. This is Japan. Japan always needs instructions from headquarters in Tokyo. And we cannot complain because, say, in one case, we were deep into a difficult negotiations. The time was like 1:30 a.m. or I think 12:30 a.m. rather. So early in the morning or deep at night. And then no way I thought Japan would receive his instructions. And we insisted with the United States that we have to make decisions tonight. We really have to make decisions tonight. And we really have to make announcements tomorrow morning. And Japan said, no problem. And then they came back to us at about a little after 2 a.m. And they received instructions from Tokyo, and that's no problem. So we had a happy ending there. And I was always wondering, and still wondering, that how come people in Tokyo work all night long and are able to give instructions at 2 a.m. But this is a very exceptional case. All other countries do not work that hard. So when the other person says, I need instructions, that usually means no. Always keep your first option, that is working out. I think this is perhaps the most important that I like to share with you. You see, when you get into instructions, number one, when you get into negotiations, important negotiations, the first thing I like to share with you is that negotiations actually begin before you come and sit at the table. Actually, I would argue that most important negotiations begin before meeting begins. Why? Because number one, you'll have to have your back steady and stable and support you. That means you'll have to have the people in your capital giving instructions to you, your buddies, your friends, people who are usually friendly to you, and when you report something, they usually receive it in a favorable way. And that's the hardest part, because otherwise you sit on the table and then you cannot really negotiate. You'll have to get instructions every step of the way. And what happens is that the person sitting across the table knows that, and then you become not very relevant. And the other party will ask his headquarters and say that Ambassador Cho is actually not very capable. He's not very powerful, and nothing much will be achieved here. So why don't you give instructions to the ambassador their ambassador in our capital and approach our relevant ministry and try to negotiate there instead of negotiating with me. And then I become irrelevant, useless, and if this story gets out to the press, and I'll become a complete laughingstock. So that's something you should never do. So that's very important. And second important is this: keep your option, first option that is working out. So when there are many countries who like to, bargain the hard way, they begin with the outrageous demands and positions that you can never accept. So much so that if these demands get out to the press, then all your press will accuse you for beginning the negotiations on their own terms, not your own terms. So this is something you should really avoid. And then, so for that to happen, you'll have to have the option of walking out. Say, I cannot really negotiate this way. I cannot negotiate with his or her opening position. So to emphasize these points, I'm ready to go back to my country. So let's meet when you're ready to negotiate. And that's something you'll have to be able to say. Otherwise, you will become a sitting duck to be shot by anybody. I'll give you an example. We had a very famous garlic negotiation between Korea and China. If there are students from China, pardon me, but it's not really bad for China, it's bad for my country, so I'll share this story with you. So it's about garlic. What happened was that we had National Assembly elections, and it so happened that one of the most powerful members of National Assembly from both government party and opposition party from the southern part of the Korean peninsula, where garlic is the most important, output. And the farmers are complaining that actually the Chinese garlic, very cheap Chinese garlic is coming into the Korean market and really hurting them. And they decided that they're going to impose I would say, the unilateral garlic embargo. And that happened. When you deal with powerful politicians, this kind of thing happened. And of course, China was very angry, with some justification. And they, being Chinese, they actually retaliated in, I should say, a very unbalanced way, because we just prohibited their garlic import, probably tens of millions of dollars, and they prohibited the import of whole array of Korea's electric and electronic goods. That's $1 billion at least. So they did that. And of course, the politicians can make these terrible decisions, but diplomats are there to, collect the scraps and to try to work things out. So a director general in our ministry in charge of trade matters was sent to Beijing and tried to negotiate. And Chinese were very angry, so Chinese, even when they are not very angry, usually begin with very, very outrageous opening positions, and that's their bargaining style, and that's very effective too. But this time they were really angry, so they really began with something that you should never contemplate to even talk about. So this director general asked for instructions that cannot really negotiate, should go back to capital. And Seoul, my capital, said, no way, everybody is watching. Every electric and electronic goods producing companies are watching. And that actually means probably about 1/3 of the members of National Assembly. So you cannot come back. You have to finish your job. And then what happened? What happened was the one that you are seeing in this PowerPoint. And President Trump is absolutely correct in saying this. That's what happened. And what happened was that we had such an outrageous deal with China. And the way the deal was made also was humiliating. And the humiliation, Korean people were very angry. And the Director General's career was almost over. Right? That's what happened. So you shouldn't do that. The third one, I think I'm a little behind time. Oops. Sorry. Yeah, sometimes you really get carried away by the flow of negotiations. And you are really focused upon the minute wordings of the agreement. And that's the whole world to you. That's so important. So you finally got the instruction from your capital that you can give this to the other person. So you can wrap things up, and you can have your own agreement, and the other person says, no, they need instructions, or they need to go back to capital. They need to get a approval from the higher above, and they need time they cannot really accept. The agreement is actually okay. They are not rejecting the agreement, but they'll have to have time to think about this and come back. That's what happens so many times with negotiation with North Korea. North Korea always, their negotiating style is they're always trying to squeeze you to the end. And you thought that that's the end of the negotiations. Now we have this one problem. If I can solve one problem on our terms, on their terms, that's the end of negotiation. And then finally it is done, and they come back and say that, oh, they need more time. So gotta be very careful. It's actually about me. I mean, I was negotiating with North Koreans a couple of times. But this negotiating tactic is actually well known to South Korean negotiators because they use these tactics for the last 5 decades. So your apparent shortcomings can work for you is a very interesting story, but since I'm behind time, first picture is one that Australian and Prime Minister and South Korean presidents hugging each other. Why do they hug each other? Because they jointly announced the initiative to create the first regional grouping in Asia and Pacific. So that became APEC. You see that? APEC. Now APEC has summit meetings and people go there. And I have my doubts now that actually APEC has overlived or outlived its usefulness because we now have several other forums for leaders, and forums multiply, and from time to time you'll have to weed them out. So you have to get rid of 1 or 2, otherwise you'll have like 10 summit meetings very easily. And so the first picture was that, and the APEC was born, and we were able to bring in 3 Chinese economies, as we called them at that time. That's China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. And in that process, when my country did not have relations with China, actually that was the first time, and Korea and China diplomats meet and kind of test each other and get the feel about how interested the other party is about establishing relations with us. And that was a good kind of way to begin. And that bore fruit only after less than 1 year. So finally in September 1992, the last picture on the right, so we established relations with China. And obviously our Foreign Minister Lee and Chinese Foreign Minister Chen Chi-chen, both of them are rather happy about that. So what I'm saying is that we were a divided nation. Nobody thought that my country would have pulled off the feat of bringing China, the country we don't have relations with, to the fold of APEC. Actually, we gave all-out efforts to that. To be fair, previous chairs Australia and Singapore, in that case, didn't actually give them the wholehearted efforts, I'm sure, but at the same time, they failed, and we succeeded because the questions were about the divided nations. So it's between China and Taiwan. And two questions. One is, how will we call China in APEC? We cannot call them their formal name because that was not possible. So we called them finally Chinese Taipei. So that was that. The second question was, we had foreign ministers meeting, and China argued that only sovereign nations have foreign ministers. They don't mind trade ministers come from Taiwan and attend APEC meetings, but they can never allow foreign ministers of quote-unquote foreign ministers from Taiwan to attend, because that will mean that they recognize Taiwan as an equal sovereign nation. They cannot do that. So this is after China joined the United Nations, so we pulled it off because we were sensitive to these issues and because we actually were in a similar, all of you will think that what's important about how to call the nation, right? I agree with you. But my country has been in a silly fight with North Korea for such a long time. We understood sensitivities. We were able to come up with some compromises that can work with both sides. And that's why I said your apparent shortcomings, divided nation, not having relation with China, China having relations with North Korea, China actually hostile to my country at that time, actually can work for you if you use that correctly. All right. So I'll go into the main question. I'm sorry. Now, let's talk about Korea's security challenges. Korea, as you can see, is geopolitically cursed. It's not a good way to put it. I don't like it very much, but that's what many people think. Because Korea, as you see, is the similar size of Great Britain. So, and Korea is among the 15th largest economies in the world today. And Korea also has a, kind of rather good military to work with. So if Korea were placed in any other part of the world, Korea would be regarded as one of the leaders in that region. But since Korea was in Northeast Asia, all our neighbors are much bigger than Korea. Even if South and North Korea united, still our neighbors will be much divided, much bigger than Korea's. That's why I say this. And also it is also divided, so not one, but half. So it's much smaller. So Korea, if we do not work very hard, and if we do not, if we are not awake and conscious of the geopolitical surroundings, this old saying at the bottom will apply to my country. The strong will do what they can, the weak will suffer what they must. This is during the Peloponnesian War. This is the wars Athenians said much smaller Melians. And when Melians played out all the plausible logics why their argument should carry the day, and finally Athenians said, okay, right, strong will do what they can, and the weak will suffer what they must. And this is something I worked all my life to avoid. Okay. Again, all right. Two faces of North Korea. The left picture is a very famous picture because George W. Bush liked it so much. So whenever he met with many of the leaders, when he was trying to explain about North Korea, he always showed this picture. You see the black spot in between. The left corner is China, right-hand side is South Korea, and the black spot is North Korea. And the right picture is the picture of locating all the flights at any given time, at any given day. So same thing. you have so many red dots, the planes flying in China, so many red dots flying in Japan, so many red dots, some in South Korea, but barely none in North Korea. So that's one face of North Korea. We have another face of North Korea. So this is another face of, second face of North Korea. Even though they are like this, in the previous slide, they have nuclear weapons. The first picture, top left, Kim Jong-un is celebrating their nuclear weapons, actually touching the nuclear bomb. I hope it is a fake bomb, otherwise you'll get exposed to radioactivity. The second one, a famous North Korean announcer name is Lee Chun-hee. When something important happens, she will always appear on TV and says, this important news, announce this importance to news to North Korean people. The third picture, Kim Jong-un is obviously very happy that some of these missiles and usually missiles work very well. And the missiles actually on the bottom, the three pictures in succession. This is Hwasong 15. The latest missile launch happened November 29th last year, 2017. And this is ICBM, can reach surely Los Angeles and San Francisco, and possibly Washington, D.C. and New York. Why? Because this missile flew only about 1,000 kilometers, but actually went up all the way to 4,475 kilometers. So this is a deliberate attempt, because when you have territories small, so if you are like Russia and China, you do that within your own territory. But if you're a small country, you cannot do that, right? You can accidentally start a war with other countries, so you do that like elevated launch, demonstrating your capability that you can send this all the way to the United States, this Hwasong 15. The bottom left is all kinds of missiles they have. You can take a look at it after this. Right, and okay, I'm coming back again. Korea's security challenges. So is Korea main enemy? This is not a boring question, because this is a very important and question of the day in my country. So 2016 Defense White Paper says they are. And we will have a new Defense White Paper in matter of days or weeks, so we'll see. And I believe that North Korea is our main adversary, and our military is planning against North Korea, not other countries, only North Korea, right? So North Korea is an enemy. But sometimes this is the question in our political world, and that tells something about our political world, because North Korea is an enemy, but at the same time our brothers and sisters. So they have two aspects we'll have to deal with, and that makes matters very complicated. But I would say that in the eyes of the military, they should be the enemy. But I also believe that it's not very useful to argue whether it's right to put that word in the Defense White Paper or not. As long as our military is planning, in the event of North Korean attack, I'll be rather happy. Actually, they have multiple challenges, and all challenges come from one fact, that is, South and North Korea have rival claims to territory, the same territory, same people, and the legitimacy on all the Korean peninsula. The first one is a United Nations General Assembly resolution that passed in the Third Assembly in 1948 that sort of said that Republic of Korea is the only a lawful government in the whole of the Korean peninsula. Of course, our constitution says in paragraph 2 that we have our territory is actually the whole Korean peninsula, not just southern part. The second one is from the North Korean Labor Party Constitution 2010. They say that they are going to build in the north of the republic, They also say that the whole republic, that's the whole Korean peninsula, is their territory. And the north of the republic builds something very powerful and actually liberate the whole peninsula. So that's their mantra. So if that's the case, I mean, we are actually unplacable adversaries, right? We have rival claims. Okay. So coming from that, we have these concrete challenges. North Korea's aggressive military doctrine enforces this position, meaning that their forces are up and close to the border. North Korea's nuclear and other asymmetrical capability means chemical weapons and biological weapons and missiles. And North Korea's subversion and espionage activities here, the first up picture was from 1968, January 1968. I was at the elementary school at the time. And North Korean commanders of 31 soldiers came all the way south and approached within 1 kilometer of the presidential office in Seoul and almost succeeded in taking out our presidents. And that was not the first time and the only time. Same thing happened in 1974, the second picture. That's the picture when our first lady was shot by North Korean assassin, and actually she died only hours later. And actually the shot was aimed at the president, not the first lady. 1974. In 1983, when my president visited Myanmar, they came and actually planted a bomb in the national cemetery and detonated the bomb actually minutes before the arrival of my president. So they missed the president, but they killed 17 members of the official delegation, including 5 cabinet ministers. So this thing happened between South and North Korea. So so going beyond North Korea, is Korean Peninsula destined to suffer from geopolitics? You're familiar with them now. And there is a saying, old saying, Korea and China are like lips and teeth. When lips are gone, teeth will feel the cold. That's what China feels. The Korean Peninsula is like a dagger to the Japanese archipelago because it looks like that. So for Japan, having control over Korea is an absolute must. That's what they are trying to say. So of course, as a Korean, I don't like these two propositions. Right, let's look at what our neighbors are doing. The United States, from rebalancing to the MAGA. Actually, I changed that, and this is an old slide. I changed that to the America First, because make America great again, I have no problems with that. But America First usually means some isolationist trend, and that's not in the interest of Korea, so that's why. So rebalancing to Asia, to the thinking only about United States. China, for a long time, hiding the light of sword, so they cultivate their land and wait for the right time to perhaps, I don't pronounce these Chinese because I don't learn Chinese, but proactive policies question. And Japan, from pacifist constitution, Constitution 9 says Japan as a country renounce the right to wage a war. So Japan cannot make war. But to return to normal relations, including they are now exercising their right of collective self-defense, and actually current Japanese government is trying to change the constitution, at least to put the war's military into the constitution. Russia, if anybody from Russia, Russia was actually, I call it strategic absence. They were actually much more active in Europe rather than in Asia for a long time. But now I think they are about to reclaim its place, and they are very active in hosting Eastern Economic Summit. Usually, to that summit, leaders of Japan, my country, China, attend, and Russia is very active in trying to be part of anything important going on in this part of the world. So we have great power rivalry, US versus China, continental versus maritime. Continental meaning Russia, China, and North Korea. Maritime meaning US and Japan. So what about South Korea? And we don't have any institutions for peace like OSCE in Europe. So we are trying to build one, but there were so many attempts, not successful as yet. Previous government of my country actually attempted one more time, called the initiative, what he was called NAPSI, Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative. We almost got the support from everybody, but the time was not on our side and it didn't happen. I hope it happens because it is good for the reducing lack of trust, reducing mistrust among the countries. We have Korea, Japan, China cooperation though. So we have trilateral summit, but still it's on again and off again. So finally this year in Tokyo, they had this summit, the bottom picture. But when you look at the Chinese Prime Minister, he was not terribly happy about it, right? So it's always a problem. I mean, there is always a bilateral problems between Korea and Japan, Korea and China and Japan. But I hope that this trilateral summit is actually good, and they make agreements that actually can help. The companies, people, NGOs, organizations. I hope that this continues. So beyond Northeast Asia, well, let's look at it. So first picture is, as you know, the One Belt, One Road initiative from China. Top left, top right is the map of the Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific strategic concept is being promoted by Trump administration. So they have these two rival, possibly clashing vision of the same part of the world. So bottom left is Chinese claims at the South China Sea. So 9 dash line, they call it, because there are 9 dots. So connecting 9 dots, and then this yellow line, north of the red line is a Chinese sea, as they claim, and that's why. Not that's why, but that actually engenders responses from the United States. So the United States Navy actually is conducting one of those freedom of navigation exercises to claim that this sea is not exclusively Chinese. Globally, it posed these questions: is post-Cold War optimism over? The long peace and prosperity is finally over. Is the world becoming rougher and more unpredictable? Let's see. So Brexit, right? I never thought Brexit would come, but it came. Second, the Paris Accord on climate change, United States withdraw from. So that's what happened. The third one is, what happened in Istanbul recently. And then middle left, the terrorism, 9/11 in 2001. And second one, the Russia claimed Crimea because majority of the population in Crimea is Russian, so they annexed Crimea. There is opposition, so there is conflict. And finally, the bottom right, refugees have become one of the top issues in many countries. Why? Because refugees only are created because of the conflicts in their home countries. There are so many conflicts in the world, and we have this. So, globally, is it return of geopolitics, a rough world? And I would say that US-led alliance is under strain because President Trump has a very unusual notion of the alliances. He doesn't believe in the intrinsic value of alliances. He believes that alliances for which United States spends money is bad alliances. So alliances are under strain at the moment. And the regional cooperation, European Union, ASEAN, there are attempts and good attempts, but not, I think, still fulfilling all its promises. Heyday of strongmen, I will not name names, but the initials are like E, P, D, maybe T. Okay. An end of history claim that was claimed in 1991 by a scholar called Francis Fukuyama in the United States. He argued that this is the end of history because now liberal democracy won over the world and there is no rivals. There will be no rivals in the future. So liberal democracy will rule the world forever. And I think it's terribly, terribly premature. And liberal consensus crumbling from trade to climate change, I said that, and cyberspace and other new security challenges all coming up.